Hello, and welcome to another episode of Seven Story Podcast. I'm Natasha Kyler, and I'm here with today's featured author, Fia. How are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you very much.
It's good to hear. Do you mind telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am a newly self-published author of a memoir. And in my real life, I'm a healthcare worker. And I've been doing that for about 10 years now. Yeah, that's what I do currently. And writing is a part-time gig on the side right now.
And how did you start writing?
Um, I began writing my story down as a young adult after a pretty chaotic childhood, just kind of as a form of self-therapy. And it over the years, it turned into an actual book, much bigger writing project than I began with. And then I took some writing classes along the way. Um, but yeah, it was really just I just wrote things down because I wanted to get them out of my head and onto paper, and it turned into a much bigger project over time.
And what inspired you to publish that?
A combination of things. I think after reading a number of memoirs that were kind of similar to mine, like The Glass Castle and Educated, I realized that there is a readership out there for stories like these, and I wanted to be part of that tradition because I felt very seen and validated when I read those stories. Like I was not the only one, and I wanted to be part of that. So that was the main reason that I decided to publish. Um, Also, just for, I tried to pitch to traditional agents and publishing companies for quite some time and just got a stack of rejection. So I decided just to do it myself after getting a lot of positive feedback from beta readers and editors, and everyone who read it said it was really good. Just do it, put it out there in the world, and so I did.
That's beautiful. And you said that you started writing it as a form of self therapy. What was it like? Like, how did you feel putting this thing out into the world that is a story of your life, like so vulnerable? How did that affect you?
Yes, it is very scary and vulnerable feeling at first. Definitely to know that people that I know and people that I don't know will be reading and judging this story. I would say it was really nerve-wracking the first couple of months, both before and after I published. But at this point, it's been 6 months or so, and I'm feeling pretty good about it. I mean, it's out there, it's done. How people take it is not really up to me at this point, and I've kind of come down from the anxiety hill that I was at when I first put it out there.
That's good. That's good. And your memoir is called Like a Redwood Sea.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Just wanted to make sure we did say the name at some point. Um, how did you come up with that title?
I was looking for something that reflected both kind of destruction and rebirth. And I really like the image of like the phoenix, but that's a pretty kind of overused um, trope, especially in titles. And I wanted something that was also um, imagery as opposed to being really blunt. Um, which is a kind of a technique that I use throughout my writing. I use a lot of nature imagery instead of spelling things out in really blunt statements. And so I decided that the image of the redwood seeds that get burned by wildfire before they can open up to start new baby trees is a perfect image for my story.
I agree with you that the phoenix is a little overused. So I love how you went about it, finding something else that really represents your story.
Yeah, thank you.
Um, what do you hope readers will take away from your book? Obviously, it's a story of your life, but typically people write with a central theme that they want someone to take away from their story. So, what was that for you?
The main, well, I don't know. I guess there's two things. One would be writing. My goal was really to write for fellow survivors of childhood trauma or domestic violence or sexual assault, all of which are discussed in my book. And for those survivors who read the book to feel less alone and feel seen, that these stories are out there and people are being made aware that these things are happening and are much more common than are realized. So I just wanted the story to validate others with similar experiences. And then I guess as a writer, I would love for people to take away kind of the balance that I attempted to strike between light and dark throughout the book. I wove a lot of poetic travel, beautiful travel stories with poetic imagery in amongst the darker, really emotional, really rough scenes. And so I would love for people to walk away with kind of an appreciation for the writing and the balance that was struck there, and just kind of the narrative of persistence, which was really the ultimate heart of my story. It's just a really stubborn little kid that never gives up and keeps moving forward no matter how bad it gets.
That's beautiful. I really love that. Um, Resilience is such an important trait to have as a person. So I really do love that.
Thank you.
They say that the best writers are profound readers. So, what are your favorite genres to read?
Oh, I read so much. I read everything. My favorite genres are probably historical fiction and fantasy currently. But I do read a ton of nonfiction, especially memoirs and history.
And does that at all play a role in how you write and like your imagery and your detailing?
It definitely does. Yeah. The books that I love the most are really emotional ones where I'm sucked into the character's emotional life. And that is very much what I tried to do within my stories, make it much more emotional, I think, than most of the memoirs that I've read, where there's a quite a bit of distance maintained between the reader and the main protagonist. I really tried to make it much more visceral and emotional because that is what I love to read. And that's what grips me and pulls me into a story.
That's very interesting. I agree that a lot of memoirs seem to have that distance
Hmm.
between the reader and the main protagonist. And so now I'm even more curious um, to read your book and see how you combated that and place your readers in the scene with you.
Yeah, I really tried to do that.
That's really awesome. I love when readers see something and go, I can write a story where it kind of does the thing that I wish I was seeing more in books.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
Shifting into your experience as a writer, what does a typical day look like for you?
Um, well, because I don't write full time, I work during the day. So I do most of my writing in either the evenings, late at night, or on the weekends. So my typical day is go to my 9 to 5, and then when I get home, get through my home duties and sit down in front of the computer. And it depends on whether I'm starting a project or finishing a project, writing wise. When I was beginning to write this, I really only sat down and wrote when I felt like I had a bunch of things that I was ready to say. I never sat down and looked at a blank screen and tried to think about writing. I only wrote when stuff was like ready to come out like immediately. I had to get it out on paper, or on the screen, not paper anymore. So that my writing process is a little bit different, I guess, in that way, that I never really sat down and thought about it. And if the words didn't come, then it just wasn't a day to write, and I just did not even attempt it.
I love
Um,
that. Oh, continue.
I was just going to say, and then, so that's the beginning of my process, right? At the end, when I'm editing, I made it a much more structured, focused exercise where I just went through and spent a couple hours in a focus session, editing, rewriting, which was much more of a task and less fun. But
I was just gonna say, I love that you don't force yourself to write. I feel like a lot of writers get in our heads and we're like, I have to get something out. I have to put something on the paper, on the screen, anything, and that kind of gets in the way of the creative process and the cathartic feeling of it all. So I love that you don't force yourself to get the words out.
yeah, it just seemed to make more sense for me, my process. Yeah, stuff doesn't come under pressure for me. Creativity doesn't work under pressure for me.
I agree. And then you said for your editing process, it's more structured. You spend intentional time going through that. Can you walk me through that process?
Yeah. So before and after I sent it to my professional editor, I went through and just spent, um, you know, a very structured amount of time each day trying to go through and get as much editing and rewriting and, screening for story flow, et cetera, all the way through the book, multiple times at this point. It was edited a couple times before I sent it out for my professional editor, and then I went through it once more after I got it back from him. So it's been a lot of hours, just going through it page by page, scene by scene.
I can imagine. I don't necessarily write long form text. I write poetry, and
Mm-hmm.
so I can only imagine how long and tedious the process is for editing a work of this nature, especially because it has to be um, true to the essence of the moment, but also take into account your thoughts and feelings of everything, and just kind of detailing all the different perspectives of what was happening in that point in time.
Yeah, for sure.
Sounds very tedious and long. Props to you.
It was a bit tedious, but I'm pretty happy with it now, so it was worth it.
That's great. It's amazing. What is your favorite thing about being a writer?
Oh, hmm. I mean, I've only written this one book. It is 130,000 words, so it's a big work. But it does feel like a pretty massive creative accomplishment, kind of like having a kid. It was the labor of almost 20 years. So, pretty, that's my favorite part, I think, at this point, is just knowing that I made this thing and I created it and I made it better. And I put it out in the world to share with others. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a lot of labor. Um, my mind went blank. Sorry. Yeah, I think. Yeah, my mind really went blank. I'm so sorry. I'm just gonna move into the next question of what do you think is the most difficult part of being a writer?
Definitely the marketing part. That has been, I knew it was going to be challenging going into it, self-publishing, but it is much, much harder than I even imagined. Just without having a big social media presence or having a big, even like a social network. Personally, I'm a pretty introverted person. I have a very small, close group of friends. So it's really hard to get the word out there, especially without a lot of money for marketing,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to build a social media following from the ground up around a single book has been really difficult. So that has by far been the most challenging thing.
I understand that. I work in social media outside of my writing, and it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of time.
A lot of time, a lot of strategy, and just
Yeah,
throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks.
right.
So, is marketing the thing that it drives you up a wall completely, or it's just like a very difficult thing?
Um, hmm. I wouldn't say it's like not intensely frustrating right now, only because I'm not expecting that much. I'm really just I'm trying not to stress about selling this book. I didn't expect it to do fantastic out of the gate, and I knew that I was an unknown. So it's not a big shock, I guess. It's just a challenging slog.
That's understandable. That's very understandable. And I want to ask you, as this is a memoir, what do you think is the most unhinged thing that you've written?
Yes, that was a good question. It's a pretty unhinged story, quite honestly. There's a lot of really bizarre things that happen. So the one that is probably the most out there from anyone else's experience would be the summer that we lived in a swamp in a little tiny 10 by 10 shack in the woods in upstate New York, my six siblings and my mother and I. And in that time, we didn't have any money. Our car was broken down. So we're kind of trapped in this swamp camp in the woods for about 4 or 5 months, just living off the land, what we could scavenge, and very occasional um, supplies from food pantries. But it was a very unique summer, and I'd say it was a pretty unhinged decision of my mother to put us there.
I'm very intrigued. I am so excited to dive into this book. Like, the more you talk about it, the more I'm interested in reading it.
Awesome.
How did you decide what to include and what to leave out?
Oh, this was hard. First, I went through and just wrote everything down that I remembered, right, for the period of years that I was writing about, which is about from when I was 6 to 18, 6 to 19. And I wrote it all down. It turned into a ginormous manuscript. It was actually much bigger than it is now. And then when I went back through to edit, I started stripping scenes out and memories out that seemed extraneous to the story, or that were duplicates of something else that was already a point that was kind of made, or a scene that was already very similar somewhere else. Um, but like in terms of, I tried to leave in all of the really important life changing moments, and there were a lot of them. So there was a lot of story to tell, but I did try to remove anything that was really extraneous or duplications, or even things that I thought kind of lent readers insight into me, but wasn't necessary for the flow of the story. I took some of that out, although I left some in. For example, I left in, through my childhood, I had some really, really vivid recurring dreams. And as an adult, looking back and reading them, because I wrote them down, I thought that they lent some really interesting insight into the mind of a child living through a lot of trauma. And so I left those in, just as a really unique perspective, insight into how a child's brain deals with trauma.
That's so interesting. Um, how, hmm, Was there any parts of your life that were especially difficult to write about, as you did say, like there is some trauma that you went through that you detail or discuss in the book?
Mhm. Um, Wait, can you say that question again?
Were there any parts of your life that were especially difficult to write about?
Okay. A lot of it was difficult to write about in the beginning. It was very, very hard to write a lot of this stuff down. When I started, I was about 20 years old, and I was actually handwriting because I didn't have a computer at that time, and my hands would get so shaky that I could only write for about 30 minutes at a time, and I would just be shaking so much I couldn't write anymore. So that was interesting over the years as I wrote all of this stuff down and revisited and edited and reread, they became much and much and much less powerful, and my had a much less emotional response every time I got through them, which was pretty cool. In hindsight, it really was exposure therapy, me exposing myself to my brain's memories over and over. So all of it was difficult to write in the beginning. I would say now, or most recently, like the very end of the book, which was the last two chapters, are still kind of emotional for me to read. I guess because they were like the ultimate most traumatic years out of a whole bunch of years of trauma, but those last two in the book were really, really hard, and it's still hard to remember those years, so that was hard to write.
And how did you emotionally navigate um, going through that? Like in the moment, it was difficult. Did you kind of just persist through that for those 30 minutes, or did you do something afterwards to like emotionally regulate yourself and come back to a calming place? How was that for you?
That's a good question. I think for me, distraction is key. So anytime I get wound up emotionally, particularly reliving some of this stuff, just kind of when I'm done and I've had enough, I step away, I set it down, I don't look at it again for a significant period of time, usually at least a week or two. And I move on immediately and switch gears to something entirely different. Like for me, it's being outside or playing with my dogs or going for a hike. Yeah, it's complete shift of gears, and then I'm good. I'm pretty good at um, compartmentalizing things. So you have to open that box in order to write about it and relive those emotions to get it out on paper. But then you have to be able to close the box and walk away. So that's kind of my process.
Yeah, yeah. And so I was just curious because I know for me, in my poetry, like I have to open the box, and then once
Yeah.
I open the box, it's like, okay, how do I close it?
Yeah, exactly.
um, did writing the memoir change your perspective of any past events that you may have gone through?
Um, it definitely was interesting to look at it now as an adult, many, many decades later. Just looking back and seeing how absolutely insane it was those years. And at the time, it was all that we knew. I really like I knew it wasn't normal, but I had no concept of how abnormal things were. But now as an adult looking back, it's pretty shocking. And it's interesting, even my siblings, many who read this manuscript in its entirety either right before or right after I published it, several of them said the same thing, like, wow, I didn't even really think about how crazy this is, but reading it as an adult, it's insane.
And so, were there any moments of the writing process that you felt were healing?
Yes. Just and writing it all down on paper was cathartic in and of itself. And then, like I said, revisiting it as I edited multiple times over the years, each time I visited a memory, it became less powerful and less painful. So that was um, it's very noticeable now to me in hindsight.
Hindsight is 2020.
Yeah.
Did you feel any pressure to portray yourself in a certain kind of way?
Um, hmm. No, but I will say I felt pressured to portray other people in certain ways. As I went through and had different family members read it, I definitely had some negative reactions from some people, both in the story and people who are just peripheral to the story, where they did not like the way that I portrayed them or their family members. And that was really difficult for me because I really tried to be as absolutely 100% authentic to each individual's um, how I perceived each individual at that time in my life, so that it was really just a reflection of where I was and where they were at that point in time, not a reflection of who they were outside of me or even who they are with me looking in now as an adult and knowing there are a lot of things happening beyond my child eyes. But I really tried to be authentic to my experience and my memory of things. And so that I definitely felt a little bit of pressure to portray certain people in certain ways because of that, but not me. I mean, the whole point of writing this was to be completely and bluntly honest about me and my experience. So I was.
And did getting a negative reaction from someone ever impact um, how you wrote them? Like, did you go in and edit anything, or were you just like, this is what it is?
Um, Both. So sometimes I left it. I mean, I always went back through and read when somebody brought something up and to make sure that it said what I wanted it to say and it portrayed what I thought that it portrayed. And sometimes I think it was someone else's perception of things that was skewing it and not what I wrote. For example, if you read the story of my father in there, you would take something completely different away from it than what his family reading it read. Um,
Mm.
and so that was what I was looking for. Like, is this just what people are seeing through their filter of emotion, or is it what the reader, a stranger, is going to take away? And I tried to go with that. So sometimes I did change things a little bit, and sometimes I didn't. And it just depended on how objective I felt the feedback was.
That makes sense. You have to do what makes sense for your story and being authentic to your truth.
Yeah, that was difficult, though. I will say that was definitely one of the more difficult parts of writing this.
And how did you get through all that difficulty?
Lots of talking it out with other people, my husband, friends, trying to get other perspectives to make sure that I was interpreting the feedback correctly and going from there.
Well, we only have a few minutes left, so I want to take this time to give you the floor to talk about any upcoming releases or where people can find you.
No upcoming releases, but people can find me on social media. I'm on Facebook and Instagram, both as Sylvan. And actually, I think my Facebook page is under my book title, Like a Redwood Seed. My Instagram is Sylvan. And I also have a website, also searchable by the book title, Like a Redwood Seed. Yeah, and readers are more than welcome to follow. I would love to hear feedback from folks. I always engage if anyone writes in, especially with comments or questions about the book. I would love to hear.
Thank you. That's it for this episode of Seven Story Podcast. Thank you so much, Fia, for joining us and sharing your story. Um, Make sure you go and check out her book. And like she said, reach out to her, let her know what you thought. That's it. I'm Natasha from Seven Story Podcast.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.